Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I would like to speak today about challenges of teaching English to non-English speaking students. And based on the fact that I've been speaking and working in Japan for 17 years, I would like to share some of my experiences teaching in Japan. And I hope that there are some ideas here that are also relevant to the teaching context in India. So, what I would like to talk about today are 4 areas. First, I will give some context on English language education in Japan, and then I will talk about challenges of teaching English in Japan in 3 major categories: societal challenges, linguistic challenges, and cultural challenges. So, as we all know, investment in English is growing as it is viewed as an essential driver of economic growth and international competitiveness. So, despite its meteoric rise as one of the world's largest economies in the aftermath of World War II, Japan is dealing with a number of societal challenges. And these include a declining population, a dropping birth rate, and an aging population and pension crisis. These are some of the reasons why there is increased awareness of the need to raise English language proficiency in Japan. So, Japan's Ministry of Education has prioritized English language proficiency as it is seen as beneficial to expanding individual opportunities, employment and career advancement, and also increasing Japan's competitiveness in globalized world. So the Ministry of Education in Japan sees it as a priority to produce global human resources. So Japanese businesses are also increasingly demanding internationally minded employees to increase Japan's international competitiveness. For example, Honda has decided to make English its corporate lingua franca, its official language, as of 2020, as a large portion of its sales are in the United States. Similarly, other Japanese companies like Uniqlo, Rakuten, and Bridgestone have English-only policies. So, as a result, the ministry has taken several steps to improve English proficiency, including mandatory English language classes from 3rd and 5th grade in elementary schools. English language classes are a foreign language activity from 3rd grade, but an official school subject from 5th grade. They've also taken the measure to increase English classes in junior high school by 30%. They have also taken the measure or recommended that classes be conducted entirely in English in high schools. They are promoting participation in study abroad programs, and they are encouraging more efficient use of ALTs. So ALTs refers to assistant language teachers, which I will come back to later, but basically they are native English speakers recruited from inner circle countries to help with language teaching in Japan. Despite these efforts, however, it is estimated that among the general Japanese population, less than 10% have professional working proficiency in English. And that refers to all 4 skills: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. But when you look at speaking fluency, less than 5% are estimated to have business level conversation fluency. And that's, again, just looking at speaking ability. So there is concern in Japan about their international ranking when it comes to English proficiency. Both TOEIC and TOEFL scores are considered to be comparatively low compared to other Asian countries and other OECD countries. And the English First English Proficiency Index ranked Japan quite low and as having low proficiency out of 80 countries, although the caveat here is that these scores are from the English First Proficiency Index, in which the sampling method is self-selection. So these scores are not necessarily representative of these regions. However, they speak to an overall pattern of low English language proficiency in Japan compared to other Asian countries and compared to other industrialized countries. So it's no surprise, therefore, that this also affects students in Japan who, despite 6 years of mandatory English education, Japanese students achieve a mediocre level of English proficiency. And so when I say 6 years, I'm referring to 3 years in junior high school and 3 years in high school. Then the students enter university, and that is where I encounter them. And so upon entering university, this is where their lack of communicative ability becomes an issue. So back in 2016, there was a survey conducted by the Japanese Ministry of Education among 12,800 schools across Japan. And this survey found that about 1/3 of junior high and high school graduates met the English language proficiency benchmarks set by the Ministry of Education. Similarly, with about 1/3 of junior high school teachers and 2/3 of high school teachers, there was a similar disappointment that not the majority met English language proficiency benchmarks set by the ministry. And I should mention that this is inconsistent with Japan's overall educational achievement. 15-year-olds in Japan, for example, score higher in reading, mathematics, and science literacy on PISA assessments compared to other OECD countries. And on the IEA TIMSS, 4th and 8th grade students in East Asian countries, including Japan, consistently lead the world in mathematics and science. So there's rising concern about low levels of English proficiency in Japan, not only from the point of view of business, but also because of Japan's increasing diversity. So Japan is often perceived as a, quote, homogeneous country, homogeneous society, perhaps because its foreign-born population was less than 2%, and consists of people from China, Korea, the Philippines, and Brazil. However, that number is increasing annually. Also, Japanese people are being exposed to intercultural contact through ethnic groups currently living in Japan, such as immigrants from Latin America, South and Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, as well as intermarriages producing children who cross ethnic, national, and racial lines. So there is evidence of increasing diversity in Japan. So it's been put like this: sojourners, immigrants, and long-term residents alike, some, quote, lucking Japanese, some not, are now part of the fabric and life of Japanese society, representing about the same level of diversity as the United Kingdom in 1990. So language classrooms, of course, are no exception. So the Ministry of Education, as I mentioned already, has vowed to enhance students' English proficiency by promoting the continued recruitment of ALTs, assistant language teachers, who are generally native English speakers from inner circle countries. Also, many Japanese students take classes taught by international teachers, including native and non-native English-speaking teachers. And native English-speaking teachers in particular differ considerably from students in their cultural dimensions and value orientations. So I will come back to this point later. So based on this context, I would like to focus on challenges in teaching English in 3 areas in Japan. societal challenges, linguistic challenges, and cultural challenges. So let's start with societal challenges. So, as I mentioned already, Japan's meteoric rise after World War II to become one of the world's largest economies has led many to believe that English is not necessary. In some ways, Japan is blinded by the light of its past successes. So Japan still has one of the lowest dependencies on foreign trade in the world, and it's light years away from requiring nationwide English fluency to keep the economy going. So this is a disincentive. But in order to sustain this economic growth, English is necessary. And according to a professor of language and culture at Nagoya University, big businesses have found that the Japanese market alone is not able to sustain the growth in profits they desire. So it follows that Japan needs English to do business with the rest of the world. So this mindset, of course, influences the approaches of policymakers and stakeholders in their attitudes to English language education. Another challenge in teaching English to Japanese students is that it is considered not necessary in daily life. English is not an official language in Japan, and there are low numbers of English speakers in Japan. But this is gradually changing as Japan becomes more diverse, as I've already mentioned. National identity issues also pose a challenge to teaching English in Japan. There is a certain amount of resistance to English language education among the Japanese public. There is also opposition among some to teaching English in elementary schools. In some sectors, English is perceived as a threat to Japanese language and culture. And there's also a strong desire to maintain Japanese national identity. So some research indicates that certain discourses in Japanese society pose obstacles to Japan's entry into the global community of English users. These are two of those discourses: Nihonjinron and Kokusai discourses. Now, these are Japanese words, and I'll just briefly explain them. So, Nihonjinron refers to a widespread belief in Japanese uniqueness and separateness from the rest of the world. The Kokusai discourse refers to a Japanese version of internationalization that is characterized more by nationalism than internationalization. So you can imagine that these discourses would have a negative impact on motivation to study English, and also on concepts like willingness to communicate and also international posture. So many of these societal attitudes manifest themselves in approaches to teaching English in Japan. Japan, as some people may be already aware, is characterized by grammar translation approaches to teaching English. In many cases, English is not really regarded as a living language. And English classes are often just a strict correspondence to university entrance examinations. And there tends to be an overemphasis on grammar translation and memorization. So a lot of the research indicates that grammar translation approaches are not conducive to helping students achieve communicative fluency in English. So Krashen, of course, has said victims of grammar-only type of instruction over-rely on conscious learning and are less likely to achieve fluency. Brown has said that grammar translation over-relies on deductive reasoning and does virtually nothing to enhance a student's communicative competence. And also, many Japanese junior high and high school students are accustomed to teacher-centered lecture-style English classes with extensive drilling and memorizing. So when these students enter university and they take student-centered communicative English classes from international teachers, they are often perceived as shy and reticent. So moving on to linguistic challenges. So I think it's fair to say that in any situation where teachers and students have different L1s, the issue of linguistic distance is always a challenge. The linguistic distance between English and Japanese is very large. If you look at all these areas, for example, vocabulary, there are no cognates between English and Japanese. Unlike English and other European languages, like German, where English is largely Germanic-based with a massive French influence and has large numbers of loan words from Latin and Greek, English does not share those cognates with Japanese. There are also completely different writing systems. Japanese has 3 alphabets, and the basic phonemes often differ from English, and this affects pronunciation and comprehensibility. There are different grammar systems. For example, Japanese doesn't have articles. Japanese makes limited use of singular and plural. They have markers called particles that they use to modify subjects and objects. Japanese make very limited use of pronouns, etc. There are also very different pragmatic systems. Pragmatics refers to social language use. So social language use differs greatly between English and Japanese. Japanese tends to have a lot more formulaic, ritualistic language than English. There are different languages, different forms of language and address for in-groups and out-groups in Japanese. And also, there are different sentence structures. So English follows the basic sentence structure, subject, verb, object, whereas in Japanese, the basic sentence structure is subject, object, verb, with the verb at the end of the sentence. So I came across this recently that illustrates the different sentence structures very well. And this gives you an idea of how challenging it would be for students learning, Japanese students learning English, and for me as a native English speaker studying Japanese. So here we have a sentence. The English sentence is, I want to try on a suit that I saw in a shop that's across the street from the hotel. So if you look at the French translation, je veux essayer un costume que j'ai vu dans une boutique en face de l'hôtel. So you can see that the subject and the verb and the object are basically in the same position in the sentence in English and in French by the sentence diagramming that is here. However, if you look at the Japanese translation of the same sentence, you can see that the words are completely rearranged. The only word that is in the same position in the English and Japanese sentence is the subject. In English, I, in Japanese, watashi wa. So you can also see that the second word in this sentence is hotel. This is a loan word in Japanese, hotel, the hotel. And want to is over here at the end of the sentence, mitai desu, which is to want to do something in Japanese. So as I said, the verb comes at the end of the sentence in Japanese. So in my years teaching in Japan, I have discovered that the differences in sentence structure pose significant obstacles to Japanese students in achieving English proficiency, not only oral proficiency, but also in writing. So moving on to cultural challenges. So I would like to focus on culture distance. The concept of culture distance represents, I think, a significant challenge in teaching English to non-English speaking students. It's a complex concept, but it basically affects 2 areas. culture distance between English and Japanese languages, and culture distance between teachers and students. So many of you are probably familiar with Hofstede's cultural dimensions theory, which was developed in the 1970s, which identified first 4 and then 5 and then 6 cultural dimensions that could explain differences in work-related values, behaviors, and beliefs. So the 6 dimensions that are most commonly used are power distance, individualism, collectivism, masculinity, femininity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence restraint. And so Hofstede has recommended this theoretical framework for the study of cross-cultural learning situations, and has suggested that each of these dimensions affect the way students approach learning and the way teachers approach teaching. So if we look at cultural distance between English and Japanese languages, so the English language tends to be rooted in individualist societies where the individual is valued over the group, where people have an I identity, and where self-reliance and independence are valued. However, Japanese is rooted in Japan, which is collectivist, in which the group is valued over the individual, where people have a we identity, and where loyalty and reliance on groups are valued. So individualism and collectivism also impacts how communication is conducted in English and Japanese in many ways. So for example, when introducing yourself in English, you would commonly give your first name, followed by your family name, followed by your wider group, your company, your school, your affiliation. Whereas in Japanese, when introducing yourself, you start with the wider group, the affiliation, the company, the school. You narrow it down to the family group and give your family name, and then you give your first name. So you can see how this would be an obstacle in helping students communicate in a different manner than they're culturally accustomed to. Another example of culture distance between English and Japanese languages relates to power distance. And power distance refers to the extent to which less powerful members of institutions and organizations accept that power is distributed unequally. So in societies that have high power distance, everyone has a defined place and role. They're more hierarchical, and polite language is commonly used. In low power distance societies, there is much more strong expectation of equality and egalitarianism. So Japanese is rooted in a high power distant, hierarchical, stratified culture. And so this is manifested in the use of keigo, polite language, honorifics, and humble language. Things like making strong distinctions in the languages that are used based on age. The use of humble language for self and when communicating with others. Whereas the English language tends to be rooted in cultures that tend to be more egalitarian and lower power distance. So there tends to be more use of casual language. There tends to be similar language used for older and younger people, and the use of first names is common. So moving on to culture distance between teachers and students. So we talked about the culture distance between English and Japanese languages, but as far as culture distance between students and teachers, this is an important question because culture affects how we perceive and organize and process knowledge. It affects our communication style. It affects how we solve problems. It also affects how we create mental categories and connect old learning to new learning. In effect, Culture affects the preferences students have for thinking, relating to others, and particular types of classroom environments and experiences. So there is a lot of research on cross-cultural learning environments. For example, this study found that when instructors and students came from different cultural environments, that this can be disempowering to students. It also found that individualist, ambiguity-tolerant students had more positive experiences than collectivist, ambiguity-intolerant students. But I should mention that this was in an online environment where the teachers were also characterized as individualist and ambiguity tolerant. And that brings us back to Hofstede's cultural dimensions, which I mentioned earlier. So in order to investigate how culture impacts teaching and learning, the cultural dimensions of learning framework was developed. And the rationale for this framework was the increasing number of cross-cultural learning environments and the need to provide culturally sensitive and culturally adaptive instructional environments. And the theoretical underpinnings for this instrument came from social psychologists Hofstede, Richard Nisbett, and Robert Levine, also from cultural anthropologist Edward T. Hall, social theorist Richard D. Lewis, who is also a cross-cultural communications consultant. And so the cultural dimensions of learning framework measures 8 cultural learning preferences in 3 categories: social relationships, epistemological beliefs, and temporal perceptions. So a few years ago, I conducted an investigation that was a quantitative investigation comparing the cultural learning preferences of 119 Japanese students and 24 international teachers. And I found statistically significant differences in all categories, but practical significance was small. So I should mention that there were limitations in the study. There were limitations in the instrument. There were limitations as pertains to the use of self-reported data. And so the findings were inconclusive. However, the lack of conclusive findings reflects the inherent difficulty in conceptualizing and operationalizing culture distance and its impact on teaching English to non-English speaking students. The lack of conclusive findings should not be taken as evidence that culture is not a factor in L2 learning, because culture affects all behaviors, including learning. So I don't have very much time left, so I would just like to wrap up by summarizing what I touched on today. I tried to briefly touch upon some of the challenges in teaching English to non-English speaking students, including societal challenges such as Japan's past economic success, the fact that English is not necessary in daily life, and the issue of national identity, which is an issue all over the world. The second category I touched on was linguistic challenges and the linguistic distance between L1 and L2. And finally, I talked about cultural challenges, and I referred to this in terms of culture distance between L1 and L2, as well as culture distance between students and teachers. So a few years ago, when I was teaching in Tokyo, a colleague of mine said, I don't go to ELT conferences because there really isn't anything to say about English language teaching. So I hope that I have convinced you otherwise, and how complex and multifaceted English language teaching is in reality. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would like to share my references with you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Leib, it certainly was convincing that there really is a lot to be said where English language teaching is concerned. This was a very informative and gripping presentation. It was particularly interesting to hear about the discourses that hinder the learning of English. One of the aims of this webinar is to draw parallels between the circumstances surrounding ELTO all around the world. These discourses that you mentioned certainly mirror the ones in India that have become increasingly popular in recent years. And while they do instill a sense of pride in prioritizing the first language, it also closes professional doors. The choice is sometimes hard. So thank you for bringing that out very effectively.
Thank you very much, Matil.
Our second speaker today is John K. Leib, MSc in TESOL, and is from the United States. He has more than 22 years of teaching experience. He taught high school English in USA, while with experience dealing with high-risk youth. For the past 17 years, he has taught English at universities across Japan, including English for academic purposes, TOEFL, TOEIC, as well as business English. Most recently, he taught at Kobe University. His experience also includes designing and implementing courses for Japanese companies and teaching English to Japan's ground self-defense forces. He was awarded the Collins Prize for the Best Dissertation by Aston University while in the MSc in TESOL program. He is interested in the impact of culture on language acquisition. For personal reasons, he cannot join this Zoom session today, but he has very thoughtfully sent us a video of his presentation. I request Dr. Nishant Tipte to play the video. Before that, though, I would like to announce that anyone who has questions about any of the presentations may text them in the chat box. Dr. Tipte? Please give us a moment. We'll be right back. Can someone tell me if the video is audible?
I can't hear it, no.
Neither can I. Let me see what's going on. Zoom is a beautiful platform which can actually bring distant people together, but sometimes these are the perils. We have tested this video on at least 3 different laptops, and yet when it comes to playing it right now, we are unable to make it audible. But please give us a couple of minutes, and we are still trying. I'm sorry to interrupt again. Seems we are unable to get the audio going. Dr. Mick King has very kindly offered that while we can get this sorted, he would be happy to go first. And Dr. King, I welcome you, but just allow me to properly introduce you first. We welcome the third speaker, now the second for today, Dr. Mick King. He is an educator specializing in tertiary teaching in the broad discipline of teaching of English to speakers of other languages, which is TESOL. His career spans more than 30 years and has included teaching, lecturing, training, consultancy, and management. He is currently assistant professor in the Department of Languages and Literature at the Community College of Qatar. His research dissemination includes publication in books from recognized publishing houses and plenary speaker sessions. He has also taught at the Middlesex University, Dubai, and the Sharjah Higher Colleges of Technology. Dr. King has done his MSc in Educational Management in TESOL with distinction and has a doctorate of education in TESOL. He is a prolific writer as well as a very popular speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. King.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anjali, for your lovely presentation. It's very nice to see Maggie. We were together in Nagpur a few years ago and had a great time there at the conference. I'd like to thank both colleges involved in this seminar, and thank you very much for inviting me. I am currently on a staycation, so apologies that I'm in a t-shirt rather than a shirt. I forgot to pack one. So we are on the Eid break here in Qatar, and so I'm trying to get a little bit of R&R before we head back to work next week. Please forgive me, my voice is a bit croaky this morning. I'm not too sure why, but I do have a bottle of water with me to keep me lubricated. Yeah, so I am going to be talking today about motivation and student motivation to learn languages and how that clashes with teacher beliefs. And I think there's an issue here in that sometimes we want to practice our own beliefs in our teaching, but sometimes that leads to a clash with what students actually feel that they need. And I'm going to try to give you an overview of my career, really, to see how I've approached this over the years and how I believe I have become more understanding of students' needs and motivations as I've gone through my career. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me 1 second so I can set it up. Okay. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes. I'm going to put my timer on so I can just check the time as I'm going along. So I'm talking about, as I said, student motivation and teacher beliefs. And I've called this "Never the Twain Shall Meet." I understand this is a quote from Rudyard Kipling from one of his poems. So never the two will meet. In other words, this is the idea that student motivation very often does not match what a teacher believes is the right thing for their students. They have different motivations. They believe that what they want should be what's taught, and this can sometimes lead to demotivation because the teacher doesn't buy into what the student wants. The teacher has the belief that I'm the authority, I'm the one that decides, I know what's best for you. So without further ado, let's move on. Why this topic? Well, I've had the recent penchant in my own research to go for autoethnography. This is when you research your own history and you look back at your experiences and your life, and you decide to analyze this through the lens of literature and theories to try and come up with something worthwhile to say, I guess, which is good feedback to yourself, but it's also interesting for other people to know. So I wrote a paper a couple of years ago on leadership and management, and how I did an autoethnography of my own career in leadership and management to see what I could glean from that. And then I also did something recently to look at my research career. My apologies if you can see a green line on the screen. I'm not sure where that came from. It wasn't me, but I hope it will disappear. If not, I hope it won't affect the slides that you can see. And I'm now old enough to reflect on a career. So I've been doing this for about 32, 33 years. And so it's always a good time to sort of look back and to think about what you've done and to see whether you can actually share something which might be of use to other people or may lead them to reflect in the similar way if they have a similar level of experience. So I do recognize this dichotomy of student motivation and teacher belief, and how this can sometimes, excuse me, this can sometimes lead to clashes or differences of opinion in the learning environment. Now, most theory on teacher beliefs will suggest that they remain pretty fixed. So we have very strong beliefs and quite individual. So we agree on many things, but on many things we don't agree. But once we go into the classroom setting, we are most comfortable, I guess, if we are teaching the way that we believe the student should be taught. So what we think is the right way to learn, that's what we tend to try to use in the classroom. This may change over time, and I think my own example will show that it does, that we adapt our teacher beliefs. But as a former mentor of mine said, you know, you only change your beliefs through experience. So basically, something has to go wrong for you to think, right, this isn't working. I have to rethink this. Excuse me. As I said, I've got a frog in my throat this morning. So while teacher beliefs remain fairly fixed, student motivations, of course, they can change, especially if we are changing our job and going from one context to another context, teaching a different kind of student, maybe in a different place. So in that sense, we're going to come across different student motivations throughout our career. It's quite possible. And it may be that our teacher beliefs, which are quite fixed, will not fit into all of these contexts. Of course, even if we stay a long time in one institution, this doesn't mean that student motivations won't change. The same as I said, teacher beliefs may change over time. So will student motivations. If we think back to our own time, if you're my age and you think back to when you were at school and you compare it to what students nowadays expect and what motivates them, there is of course a great difference to that. And in the context of learning English, this may also be changing. So something has to give. Either we need to get our students to change their motivations to fit our beliefs, or we have to consider re-examining our beliefs in the context in which we teach. In other words, if it's not working, something needs to change. Now, this is not going to be a theoretical presentation. I don't want to go into a lot of detail on that. I want to talk more about my story. So I'd let you know something about my experiences, but I will take a brief look at language learning motivation. I'm going to gloss over it really, just taking two motivational theories from second language learning. So Gardner's motivational theory, I'll come to the two definitions in a minute, but Gardner worked a lot with Lambert, and they see language learning is a combination of desire, effort, and attitudes to language learning. So the desire that a student has to learn it, the effort they're willing to put in, and also their positive, hopefully, attitude to the target language will lead to them being successful. And success, therefore, is not dependent on ability or aptitude. So somebody who could have quite an aptitude for language learning, but is not interested in learning a particular language, may not be as successful as someone who does not have that aptitude, but really, really wants to learn that language. And the reason why we might want to do that is covered by two orientations, according to Gardner. That is integrative orientation. That's when you have a desire as an individual to learn this language, versus instrumental orientation, where you take a more pragmatic view. So for example, it's interesting for me to learn this language because I can get a better job. Now, there's probably a combination of both in most of our language learners' minds, but there may be an orientation towards one side or the other, depending on the individual. What Gardner is proposing is that integrative orientation generally leads to more success. So it's about what the student wants to do that will lead to potential success. Now, Deci and Ryan also follow this pattern, but they look at it through the lens of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation is more aligned to instrumental orientation in the sense that there are things on the outside which motivate you to study a language. Maybe more opportunity in life, maybe you just have to because it's the rule and you have to pass the exam to pass your school diploma or your degree. And then we have intrinsic, which is more from the inside. So intrinsic will include self-determination. This means that you really, really want to determine yourself how you're going to learn. And you might even do that without a teacher, for example. But if you are in a learning environment, then you need that social integration. You need to have that interaction with fellow students and teachers. And the level of difficulty needs to be appropriate for you to be successful. So this is what Deci and Ryan are including under the term intrinsic motivation. And we'll come back to that later. So you're probably already guessing where my standpoint is on who should change in this relation, in this standoff, this dichotomy. If I could find the dream job with dream students, then I win, okay? I don't need to change my teacher beliefs because I'm gonna teach what I believe in, and the students in front of me, they will completely buy into my beliefs, and they will willingly study according to what I believe is the right way to learn a language. This is the ideal job. How many of us have this job, have ever found it? Very, very few, I would assume. Generally speaking, we're in one of the other scenarios where we have to make compromises one way or the other to get a job, to get a salary, to put food on the table. So this, to a certain degree, means I lose. I can't 100% implement my teacher beliefs because my context, my environment does not allow it. So what I've come to consider over the years is that it is my duty to use my skill and experience as an educator to adapt to my students' motivations for studying English or studying in English, be those motivations intrinsic or extrinsic. I believe it's my duty to adapt. Students adapt in other ways, I guess, to my teaching style and so on, but basically, I need to be aware of what their motivations are, and this will hopefully lead to their success. So this is my standpoint, my thesis, and this is what I'm going to be arguing through the rest of the session. Now, I'm going to give you a quick potted history of my teaching career. And I want to focus here on the level of student motivation that I found, the extent to which I was able to adhere to my teaching beliefs, and how I was then evaluated by my students. So way back when I was a mere pup, I was still a university student. I did some summer school teaching in the UK with teenagers who were coming for a part holiday, part language learning. So the stakes were not very high. Students just wanted to interact, they wanted to speak. And so because this was in the period of communicative language teaching, I could pretty much apply my teacher beliefs. And so my adherence to my beliefs was very high. And the students liked it, they got what they wanted. And so I was generally well evaluated. I then moved to Spain and worked in a language school. And my students there were mainly teenagers and adults. Stakes were medium. I mean, a lot of the teenagers, they came for help with their English in school. But internally to our language institute, there was not really any sort of high stakes. We just gave them tests and let them pass on to the next level within our institution. Some students did do Cambridge exams like the first certificate or the advanced or PET or KET. So that was a little bit higher, I guess. So that's why I put medium for stakes. And their motivations, of course, were different. So I was teaching different kinds of classes with different kinds of motivations. So certainly, I would say I adhered to my beliefs, firstly in how to teach general English to help kids in school, and also how to teach exam preparation. I had my beliefs in that, I applied them, and that was all okay. And generally speaking, I got decent evaluations. I then moved into higher education. I went to work in a university in the Netherlands, where I was in the Faculty of Economics and Management, so teaching a lot of ESP, English for Specific Purposes, to undergrad students. The stakes were suddenly higher. They had to pass. And the students there in Holland, they were really great, to be honest. I mean, they really wanted to learn. They were already very talented and competent and independent learners. And this was a problem-based learning university. So I learned about problem-based learning. That became part of my philosophy, my teaching philosophy. And so therefore, one of my beliefs. And so I was able to apply it. And generally speaking, the students were happy. I then went to work in the branch campus of the same university here in Qatar. So I was teaching undergrad students. The stakes were high, but the students were different. And here we come to this first example of how the context changes, and you have to maybe sort of reconsider that how you used to do things doesn't always work. What was interesting when I came to Qatar is that it was clear to me that although the students did want to learn, for them, most important was a pass and a grade. I was still able to stick to my beliefs because I was teaching PBL, but the students found PBL very, very difficult. They liked me as a person. I still actually have contact with many of those students. So I got good evaluations, but the qualitative comments would also include, he's really tough, he's really strict, you know, and we find it really, really hard. So I didn't get quite the same kind of evaluation as I got back in the home campus. After that, I moved to the UAE and I worked in a government college teaching Emirati nationals Foundation English and Diploma English. Again, they had to pass. They had a very similar orientation as my students in Qatar regarding their motivations. I started in this job by sticking to my beliefs. And then, as I'll explain later, I changed that strategy based on my experiences. So I started to veer away from my beliefs. And one reason I did this is because at the beginning, my evaluations were not particularly good. And so I adapted and then they became better. Now, we shouldn't be party to, judging our success on student evaluations, but I certainly give them far more credence than many other teachers do. I'd rather know what my students think than my superiors. I think we don't often give enough ear and voice to our students. And I'll be coming back to that later. I then moved back to Dubai I was in the UAE in Sharjah, then I went into the Emirate of Dubai, and I taught research foundation courses to students, high stakes. They were very good students. They really wanted to learn. They were had very good aptitude, application. They were very intrinsically motivated, I would say. So again, I could switch back to adhering to my beliefs in teaching, and generally speaking, the students were very happy. I'm currently, for the last this is my 6th year now, I'm back in Qatar in a government college. So teaching very similar students to the government college in the UAE, where they are focusing very much on passing rather than learning. Here, I have not foregone completely my teaching beliefs, but I would say my adherence is medium to low, and I get very good evaluations. Again, it's not just about getting good evaluations. It's about, I don't see it that way. I see it as doing what my students feel that they need and taking into account their perspective. So I'm going to show this table again, but I'm going to sort of put it into career phases, if you like. So back in the early days, when the stakes were not so high, I could adhere to my beliefs, and students were happy with that. In the universities that I taught in the Netherlands, in Qatar the first time, and then in Dubai, again, I did stick to my beliefs to a great degree. My adherence was high, but the evaluation varied, I would say, and that gives an indication that the student body changed slightly each time, and so I didn't get the same sort of positive reaction like in Dubai as I got in the Management University in Qatar. And then finally, and the most interesting, I think, is working in government colleges in the UAE and Qatar. Very, very similar students, similar motivations. And as you can see, I made a change in my adherence to my beliefs in those two institutions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in detail in the next few slides. So what are my beliefs? I think I should share them with you. Well, when I apply for a job, when I have to do my teaching philosophy, I talk about my personal triptych, and that is, communicative language teaching, which has stayed with me since the 90s, I guess. Problem-based learning, which I learned in that Dutch university, which I still use tangentially in the way that I interact with students. I do a lot of Socrative questioning with them and things like this. And finally, humanistic teaching. And this is the key one, which I think is the bedrock of what I'm trying to say today. So these, I can say through my career, have been added to chronologically. Had I written my teaching philosophy in the 90s, I would have said CLT, CLT, CLT. Then I discovered PBL. I thought, this is amazing. I wanted to include that. And finally, at a certain point, I decided I need to look at a more humanistic angle to teaching, and that now forms this triptych of my beliefs. So I adapted my beliefs each time I encountered a new type of student. So maybe our beliefs are not as fixed as we would like to think. So what about student motivations? Well, we talked about Decky and Ryan and the concepts of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So the kind of intrinsic motivation that students may have is a personal desire to pass with a good grade. Possibly secondary to that in some contexts is to improve. I want to improve my English. Maybe they want to focus on one particular skill, you know. I can remember back when I was a teacher in the early days, and students would come to the Language Institute and say, I want to improve my speaking. And you go, no, 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 no. You can't just improve. You have to learn everything. You have to have, you have to learn the language, you need to focus on all 4 skills. Were that same student to come in now and ask me, I would have a different perspective. I would say, okay, you want to improve your speaking, so let's work on that. Again, experience tells us a lot and teaches us a lot, I believe. Another reason why people may want to learn a language is to become more employable and then to interact with others. And there are many, many more. Extrinsic motivation could be that you have to pass this course as part of a degree or certificate. You won't get promoted at work unless you have a degree, and that degree includes, for example, learning English. Sometimes to keep a job, and I know in the world of L1 and L2 language teachers in some parts of the world, it's really not fair that some teachers have to pass an IELTS in order to keep a job. This has happened in the Gulf region, and really it's wrong, but this is the reality. And then to meet others' expectations, maybe your parents have an expectation that you will do well in your course, and so you feel a pressure to do that. Along with motivations are, of course, demotivations. Sometimes students are put into a classroom where they just find the level too difficult. They feel that they have been forced to do this course. And this is actually my current reality, where a lot of our students, they don't particularly want to do English courses, but they have to do them. They may not be used to the preferred pedagogy. So here we have that clash with teacher beliefs. So you may be teaching them in a way which they don't want to learn. Also, in many environments, I feel students are often battered by high stakes assessment. Now, some students love this, they love tests, but others, it puts them under a lot of stress. And I call it the killer of creativity, because I think to grow, you have to take risks. And if you take risks, you may fail, you may fall, you have to get up again. But when everything is high stakes, you don't take those risks, you just play safe. And that way you don't really grow. This is just a personal view. There is, of course, with English, this hue of imperialism. The fact that this idea of empire and post-colonial sort of attitudes to English, and why should we be learning this language? We should be focusing on our local language, which are, of course, very valid feelings. Some students just don't want to study it. And I'm very sympathetic to that, by the way. Having said that, in previous research I've done, I found that students actually don't, in the Gulf context, don't really pay too much attention to that. They sometimes say, why do I have to do this? Not because they have any sort of negative attitude towards English, but they want to study their major in Arabic. So they're thinking, why do I have to pass an English course to study in Arabic? Which I think is a very valid perspective. Very often they say, I will improve my English later. I think that's a fair point. There is this fear of making mistakes. It's not like other subjects where you are studying them in your mother tongue, and therefore you can communicate in the written and the oral form comfortably. Here you might make mistakes, you may get embarrassed, especially if you're an adult. They are more prone to embarrassment if they get things wrong. And then, of course, sometimes the institutional requirements of the study say you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to have so many assessments. And that can demotivate as well. Sometimes students will say, why do we have so many tests? Why can't we just practice and grow? But in this age of objectivity and assessment, we are really straitjacketed in that respect. We constantly have to assess our students and submit grades. So let's go back to, I'm going to go back in a minute to the two highlighted situations which are most relevant for my current teaching situation and come later in my career. But before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about a case study from myself and my trauma in trying to learn Arabic. Now, I've worked in different countries around in my career. I've worked in Holland, I've worked in Spain, I've worked in England, Germany, and I have always learned the language where I went to a good level. I've passed state exams, and I have been, if not fluent, then almost fluent. I've lived in the Arabic world, in the Arab world in the Gulf for 22 years. I do not speak Arabic. I have a smattering of Arabic. It doesn't mean that I didn't try. So I'm looking at myself now as the student. My own efforts to learn Arabic have been a disaster. Why? Because when I've taken a teacher or joined a course, I found that the pedagogy is bogged down in cultural associations of the language. Because Arabic is linked in many ways to to the Quran. And this is, of course, something which is very important to the cultures and societies. This, I feel, is my feeling, this seeps into the way that Arabic is taught. So the pedagogy is driven by these associations. So interlanguage or mistakes are not acceptable. You cannot speak a pidgin version of Arabic. It has to be exactly right. So when you start learning it, it's all about the the alphabet, the sounds, and so you're repeating like you are in, I'm sorry to say, like in KG or something like this. You're an adult. My motivations for learning the language were to try to be able to follow meetings at work where I was in management, and people switched into Arabic, so I could then at least follow. Regarding producing the language, I had no desire to speak perfect Arabic. As long as I could communicate what I wanted to say, that was my motivation for learning. I did not get that from any of the courses I ever took over the last 20 years. The only success I had is when I took on this idea of self-determination from Decky and Ryan, and I said, right, I'm going to learn on my own. Because I'm motivated, I want to learn. So I got books, I studied myself, and in a very short time, I was actually able to start communicating sentences, and people were amazed because it happened very quickly, because I had that integrative and intrinsic drive to try to learn this language. Yes, I made loads of mistakes, but it didn't matter. I was able to communicate. I kind of lost it over the years, but that was the only time I was really successful in learning Arabic, because I learned according to my motivation, not what the teacher told me I should be doing and how I should be learning. So what about the situations of the two colleges? Well, when I went to the UAE, this was my first time teaching Gulf Arabs, so a different context, different culture. I was teaching levels ranging from the CEFR A2 to B2. And in the first semester, I taught women. I stuck to the script because it was a very oppressive management structure there. I didn't want to do anything wrong. So I just did what I thought I should do. And my feedback from the students was average, I would say. I then went to the men's college in the second semester, and I was advised by my colleagues, loosen up a bit, because the men will not accept it if you are too strict. So my senior students were happy, but my juniors, they absolutely destroyed me in my first evaluation, my one and only time in my career where I've received really poor evaluations. So this was a stone in my shoe moment. This was something which I had to resolve. It was a pain, and I had to do something about it. So this is when I brought humanism into my triptych of my teaching philosophy. I started to say, well, let me find out what it is that motivates them. So I let them have a couple of meetings while I was sitting on the outside where they spoke to each other about why they didn't like the class. And I listened and I took notes, and then I made a plan for them. I said, right, guys, we're going to do this. Thankfully, after that, my evaluations improved a lot because they felt that I was listening to them. So when I came back to teaching Gulf Arabs a second time, which is my current job, again, with the same kind of levels, I learned from my mistakes. So now my current strategy is that I always survey my students at the beginning of each course on their motivations. What do they want from this course? Why are they doing it? And then I reflect, when I see the results, I reflect on the extent to which I can match these student motivations with my beliefs and my values. And then I adapt the course within the given parameters of the college. I adapt my pedagogy within those given parameters. And I always do an early course feedback session on my teaching. So after 3 or 4 weeks, I send out a survey. Are you happy with me? Are you happy with the way I teach? Just to see if I'm on the right track. So summing up, I've got about 30 seconds left. I think we say, oh, the students are not motivated. But do we ask them what their motivation is? Is that part of our plan? Or do we believe that we are the sage on the stage, the master of all, and what we believe in how they should be taught, that is what they should buy into? Find out about their lives and their motivations. So, and then without completely compromising your own beliefs and values and working within those extrinsically determined parameters, adjust your approach to what they want, and see if it makes a difference. You should try it out. If you feel your students are not motivated, try it out and see whether they have just different motivations from you. And then if you adapt, maybe you'll see that they will also be very, very happy. So final musings. I'm sorry, I've gone a little bit over time. Just give me another minute or so. As vocational professionals, we do tend to torture ourselves a bit, but this does show how we care. We're always thinking about our students. So we constantly question our actions in relation to how it affects our students. We ask ourselves these questions. Do I feel comfortable about foregoing some of my beliefs? Well, now I'm happy with that. When I was younger, I would be steadfastly stick to my beliefs. Do I feel I'm selling my students short because I'm not following my beliefs? No. It's what they want. And as long as we are moving towards the learning objectives, then I don't feel I'm selling my students short. Am I behaving professionally? I think I am, because I'm adapting to my context. Am I exercising integrity? I would never cut corners with the students, but I would certainly adjust the way that I do things to make them feel more comfortable in my classroom. And I'll end with just one student soundbite. I actually wanted to show some more, but I can't access my work platforms at the moment. But there was one that I got from a group last year. We also need to be motivated. And student feedback is extremely important in that regard. It can really demotivate us when it's negative. I'm not saying that I do things just to get good feedback, but when you get that good feedback, it really gives you such a boost as a teacher. As people say, this is why we teach, when we see our students really value our efforts. So this was a question that was asked in an end of course survey. And I asked the students, if you could go back to the start of the course, what advice would you give the teacher on how to make the course better? Now, this particular group, I was blown away by their feedback because it made me feel so great. But I just want to share with you one that really picks at, I think, what I'm trying to say in the presentation today. She said, Dr. Michael King, what am I going to write is not an opinion, it's really a fact. If you ask all of his students, they will answer the same. Accuracy, order, organization, giving the student all of their rights, really important, and the confidence to ask and try till they got it. All of these properties, and sorry for not mentioning the rest because I have a word limit, are what all students need. My advice to the doctor is to continue the way he is because it is really super perfect. Sorry that I'm massaging my own ego here, but I think everybody wants to get that kind of feedback from their students. Thank you so much. That's me done. And I hope that you took away something useful from the session.
Dr. King, I loved how you dug deep into your own experiences to tell us more about the challenges you faced while teaching English and also how you motivated your students. Your students certainly think that you are doing a great job of it. And I can say the same with confidence because I know about your integrity, about your dedication to your profession. We can all learn from that. We not only owe you one for your riveting presentation, but there's more to be thankful for. For one, we dragged you out of your R&R in your staycation, photos of which are looking amazing, by the way, on Facebook. Despite that, you took out the time and you were here, gave a wonderful presentation. It was really detailed and very observant. But apart from that, I'm also grateful to you for rescuing us when we could not play John Leave's video. Thank you very much.
My pleasure on all counts. Thank you. Thank you.
And now I hope we have better luck when we try and play Mr. Leave's video once again. I request John to take over, please.
Thank you, Anjali. Just a moment.
Oh, lovely, we can hear you.
I'm John Leib, husband of Dr. Leib, who you just heard from. Nice to meet you all. I want to thank you for inviting me here today. A big thank you to Dr. Anjali for inviting me. A little bit about myself. I've been a teacher for more than 23 years, the last 17 plus years teaching in Japan. As my wife, Dr. Leap, has already mentioned, there are many obstacles to building second language fluency. Today, I'm going to share with you what has worked for me in the language classroom and what has helped my students to overcome obstacles and at the same time improve their speaking fluency, particularly when making presentations. Challenges. We have seen that there are many obstacles to students improving their speaking fluency, including societal, linguistic, and cultural factors. Here's my outline for today. I'll talk about 4 of the most common types of obstacles. Then I'll talk about creating a safe environment, rules for students, my approach with emphasis on topics, groups, timed presentations, and giving teacher feedback. Then I'll talk about group organization and then finish with an end note. Okay, so what are some obstacles you have encountered when trying to improve speaking fluency among your students? If you want to pause it here, that's fine. When you're ready, come on back. Okay, I've experienced 4 common obstacles. The first, lack of student motivation. The second, reluctance to make errors. Third, peer pressure. And the fourth, shyness or stage fright, which comes from not wanting to lose face. So a lack of motivation, it might be for a variety of reasons. Learning a second language, in this case English, may not be a priority for our students. They may not think that learning English is relevant to their daily lives, or they might not find it enjoyable. Let's face it, grammar translation is not really enjoyable. They may lack parental support at home. Can you think of some other reasons for students lacking motivation? You can pause the video here and discuss among yourselves, and then come back when you're ready. Okay, reluctance to make errors. Students are often worried about losing face. They've been taught to be perfect. This is especially true in Japan. They haven't had enough practice speaking English. I hear this all the time from my students. They tell me that I'm probably the only class that they get to practice speaking English. Most of the time, they're just reading, writing, and listening. Can you think of some other reasons for students being reluctant to make errors? You can pause the video if you want. I'll still be here. Okay, the third reason might be peer pressure. Societal norms may play a part. They may feel pressure to conform and not stand out. Okay, this is especially true in Japan, where the Japanese have a saying, the nail that stands out gets hammered down. It's the opposite in America because we're an individualist society. But Japan is a collectivist society. And so students are reluctant to buck the norm, so to speak. Another possibility is they might feel bullied. Okay, in Japan, they have what's called senpai and kohai. And the younger students have to show respect to their older students. So if the older students frown on them standing out, then they might be reluctant. One of the things we often see in the Japanese classroom is students that are pretty good using English sometimes revert to speaking in katakana. For example, they might say credito cardo for credit card, using katakana pronunciation. Another possibility is they're afraid of being ostracized, so they succumb to the peer pressure. Can you think of some other reasons for peer pressure? Pause the video, discuss, and then come back. Okay, the fourth most common reason for not speaking is shyness or stage fright. I think we've all experienced that at one time or another. Students may fear social attention or the limelight, especially if they are introverts. I'm a little bit of an introvert myself. I don't crave being in front of the audience. I prefer not to be, even though I'm a teacher. Kind of funny. Students might fear the teacher. If the teacher is strict, never smiles, is always serious, they might be afraid of making mistakes. Students oftentimes lack experience speaking in front of groups. They may lack confidence in their own abilities because nobody's ever given them praise and encouraged them. Can you think of some other reasons for shyness or stage fright? Pause the video, discuss, come back when you're ready. Okay, so how do we minimize or reduce those problems in the classroom? Any thoughts? It starts with creating a safe environment. How do we make a safe environment? As teachers, we have a responsibility to set the tone. So here's how I do it. I create a safe environment by arriving early. Sometimes I play relaxing background music. Sometimes I play pop music. Students seem to like that. I adopt a casual, friendly style. I joke with them. I pretend that I'm a late night talk show host and I welcome them in an enthusiastic way. I smile a lot. Okay, rules for student presentations. These are things that I tell the students when they're in their groups. I tell them no harsh criticism. If you have nothing constructive to say to your classmates, then don't say anything. Compliment performance, not the person. Okay, that's really important. So let me share my approach to improving student speaking fluency. Okay, so I assign topics the week before. Then students are divided into groups. I conduct timed presentations and I give positive feedback. Let me show you how I do that. Topics, students have to find topics on reputable English language news sites. For example, in Japan, we direct them to the Japan Times, maybe the New York Times, maybe the Guardian, the UK Guardian. There are a number of free news websites, the AP News website, Reuters News website, okay? So they find a news story from a reliable source, okay? They read it, Then they have to write a summary of the important points from that story. And that summary becomes their script for their presentations. Then students are encouraged to practice their presentations at home. My experience is they don't. They have too much confidence in themselves oftentimes, and they wait until they get to the classroom and then they become scared. So I still encourage them though. Okay, so here is what is key to building speaking fluency. I have my students present 3 times during the class. Here's where the scaffolding comes in. The first time students present, they're allowed to present with notes. The second presentation only covers speak. Okay, so they look at their notes only briefly. And the third time they present, no notes allowed. Okay. The following is also key. Students present 3 times, each time in front of a new group. I'll explain how I do that later. But the important thing is here, they have an opportunity to improve upon their first and second presentations when they get to the third time in front of a whole new group of students. Okay, so the groups, I divide the groups into 3 to 6 students, usually. Sometimes they can be bigger, it depends on the class. I generally teach class sizes between 25 and 45. The smaller the group, the faster the presentations go. So you finish early. My classes are usually 90 minutes. The larger the group, the longer to finish. At any one time, there can be 6 students speaking at once. So students must speak clearly for their groups. I have never seen it be a problem to hear other students talking at the same time. I'll explain why in a moment. So why do it like this? Students often don't like to stand out. They feel protected when they are not the only student speaking. It takes the spotlight off of them. Timed student presentations. I always time my presentations. The presentations are usually either 2 minutes or 3 minutes long with an extra minute for questions. The presenters ask the audience questions and the audience asks the presenters questions. Speakers and their audience members should ask questions, so you need to encourage them if they don't. Teachers stand in the back of the classroom with a timer. Okay, so usually I just use my watch. I have a sports watch and I just set the timer. The presenters stand in front of their groups. Okay, so maybe they're all sitting down and then I say, presenters, stand up. They go to stand up and then I tell them, presenters, begin. And they all start speaking at the same time for their groups. When time is up, I say question time. This tells them they can wrap up their summaries and then begin questions. It works really well. When that's finished, I say finish, and they all go back to their seats. So what is the benefit of this? Time presentations work well because students know there is an end time. It makes them more comfortable. The presentations aren't that long, so they feel it's not going to drag on. I can finish in a reasonable amount of time. And that seems to work really well with them. Plus, everybody gets to speak in the class 3 times. Okay, when I do give feedback, I don't give it until after the 3rd presentation. And when I do, I give it in a general way. I give encouragement and I compliment what students did well. If I have to give criticism, I give it to the class, not to a particular student. Again, I'm saving them face. Okay, just some tips. It's better to be in a room with movable chairs. And remember this is really important. If you're having fun, the students will have fun too. Oftentimes, my students are laughing, sometimes clapping. There's lots of interaction going on with their group members. Here's a simple way to create groups. On the board, doesn't matter if you have a chalkboard or a whiteboard, I put the groups on the board, okay, in the order where I want them to sit in the classroom. So here we have an example of 6 groups and maybe 6 students per group, 36 students. You could have more. Some groups can have more. I generally avoid having 1 extra student in a group because you don't want that student speaking alone. So I might just take a couple of students off of other groups and create group 7, okay? That way, nobody's ever speaking alone. Okay, so here's how I do it on the board. Because I arrive early in class, I write their names on the board. Everybody that's gonna be there, okay? You can take attendance this way too. And if students aren't there, some are absent, you can just mark them off. Okay, but here's how the first group would go. So we have 6 groups and we go across. And so my apologies if I pronounce Indian names incorrectly. First group here is highlighted in red: Satara, Agastya, Neela, Nikhil, Evan, Lata. Okay, so that'd be one group. And then we have 2 through 6, okay? So the second grouping, I just go down the list on the board, okay? So group 1 is Satara again, then Naya, Inaya, Shaila, Dia, and Tamia. Okay, so you're saying, hey, Satara is having to do it first. It happens, but sometimes it's better to go first because you get it over with, right? Okay. So that's the second time. The third time, and this is what usually students get a kick out of when I do this on the board, I go diagonally. So here we have group 1, Satara, Sana, Aja, Farid, Charu, and Prasad, okay? Now here's where it's important to have colored chalk or colored ink pens because you could connect the names with lines. That's what I would do. And made it easier for the students to know where to go. But you're probably saying, yeah, but look at those other groups. How do you do that with them? Well, I'm going to show you right here. Color coded for your benefit, but obviously you're not going to do that on the chalkboard. But here's how it would go. So look at group 2. Naya, Ishan, AJ, Mahika, Devi. And then after Devi, because she's in line 6, it jumps up to Lata, okay? Then look at group 3. Starts with Inaya, then Dhruv, Raj, Ashwin, then jumps up to Avon, and then Neha. Okay, and it does this all the way down. So you get down to the bottom in group 6, Tamia, is followed by Agastya, Jaya, Divya, Kavi, and Akshay. Again, my apologies if I've pronounced those names wrong. So if you do it right, you only have to write their names on the board once. Now, sometimes students do come in late, and you could either add them to an existing group, or you can make group 7. Okay, work with it. All right, to vary group order, you can begin each class in the middle or the end of your class roster. That's what I do. But I try to avoid having one student speak alone in front of the class. Okay, and that's where taking a few students away from some of the other groups and creating a group 7 might actually be useful. Okay, so tips: arrive early to class and put names on the board. And if possible, use colored pens or chalk, okay? Regarding teacher feedback, I think I already mentioned this. After students are finished presenting, I give feedback. My feedback is generally positive, and if I have criticism, I will keep it general and not single out any particular student. Okay, so what I've observed in the classroom: students often see a vast improvement in their performance. I see it from their first presentation to their final presentation. When they first read, it sounds awkward and stilted. It just doesn't come across very well. But then they realize with practice, they can do it. This results in smiles and laughter. And something they once dreaded doing is now a fun opportunity to share what they've learned with their classmates. So between the first presentation and the final presentation, big improvements. Thank you for your attention. Have a great conference. If you have any questions, you can email me at leadjohn2009@gmail.com. Thank you.
Mr. Leib, this was such a hands-on approach to teaching a language that induces anxiety in its learning. Honestly speaking, there should be no reason why learning English should be any different from learning any other language. But the world over, we see anxiety playing a large role in the acquisition of this language. Mr. Leib, we love how you do your utmost to lessen that discomfort. It's what makes you such an involved teacher. Thank you for sharing your techniques with us. I now request the principal of Dr. L.D. Balkhande College of Arts and Commerce, Pauni, District Bandara, to address the seminar. Dr. Nandagauri. Dr. Nandagauri, could I please ask you to come online and address the seminar today? Do we have Dr. Nandagauri here? He did tell me, though, that there is a meeting in his college that was quite crucial and he may not be able to join in time. Since I don't see him coming online, can I request our principal, Dr. Milind Barhate, to make the closing remarks for this international webinar today?
Yes, I am here. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay, thank you. I am glad that CPN Berar College, Nagpur, and Balkhande College, Pauni, has organized this international webinar on the topic challenges of teaching English to non-English speaking students. guest speakers of today's webinar, Dr. Mike King, Dr. Maggie Lieb, and Dr. John Lieb. My colleague, Shri Nanda Gauri, principal of Balkhanda College, Pavni, the coordinator of this webinar, Ms. Anjali Patil, all teachers and my dear students. It gives me immense pleasure while speaking in this international webinar. Students and teachers from all over India as well as even abroad have joined this webinar, and this presence of students and teachers underlines the importance of today's topic. As we all know, English is the #1 spoken language in the world. This fact everyone has to accept. We should be proud of our mother tongue, but one has to accept the importance of English language also. In this part of India, that is Vidarbha, Nagpur, our students are intelligent and very hardworking. But where they lack is the ability to speak English fluently, and this is our day-to-day experience. Teaching English to non-English speaking students is really a challenge. It is a challenge for our teachers. The teacher has to take extra efforts to achieve this task. In our college, that is CPN Bera College, Nagpur, we are specifically focusing on this aspect of improving fluency in English language. Webinars, workshops, tutorials, etc. are regularly arranged for students in addition to their regular classroom teaching. I believe the valuable inputs from all the guest speakers today will definitely prove to be helpful in achieving our objectives. This webinar will also definitely help the students and the teachers, specifically teachers. I take this opportunity to assure you all that CPN Bera College will be organizing such kind of activities for teachers as well as student-centric activities in future also. Thanks for this grand response. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Nandagauri is here today, and because he was so instrumental in helping in putting this webinar together, I think I'll be given the permission to go against the convention and ask him to speak even after the close remarks. Dr. Nandagauri.
Thank you, ma'am. Respected Dr. Bharati sir, Principal CPN Bera College, Nagpur, all the eminent foreign speakers, organizers, and dear participants. It has been an immense pleasure to witness such wonderful webinar conducted collaboratively by CPN Bera College and Dr. L.D. Balkhande College, Pune. The topic touched various aspects related to teaching English and speaking among non-English speaking students in different nations also. Though we have been teaching and learning English since so many years, we cannot say that we have achieved the goal. We are using our regional mother languages for our communication and studies in home and schools. Even in teaching, it is impossible to use only English as teaching method in rural area also. We are using translation methods since years. Different methods should be used from the beginning of the learning of students in the primary schools, like that the substitution methods or the direct method, and the convents are also using that methods. In urban India, conditions are becoming better, but what about the outskirts of the cities We cannot say that English should be used for all communications on the basis of a very few English speaking persons or English speakers. We the teachers, parents, educationalists, boards, and the universities are also responsible for above situation. Much work is to be done in this field. Even in this pandemic, we are all aware about the conditions of online education when the data or the internet has not reached to the rural area like our Pauni. We cannot compare Nagpur with Gadchiroli or the Kerala with Bihar. But this was our smallest effort in this direction. I, on behalf of my college, congratulate all the responsible persons for the organization of this wonderful webinar. And in future also, we shall do the same. Thank you. Thank you, all.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Margaret Leib, John Leib, Dr. Mick King, I'm totally delighted that we could all be on the same platform once again today. I'm very, very thankful to all of you for being here. It was particularly difficult for Maggie and John, but it is humbling to see how they put all that aside to be here today and even help with the technological challenges that we faced in between. Thank you. Dr. King, I hope the webinar was not too big a disruption in your staycation and that you can go right back into holiday mode. Many thanks to you too. I would also like to thank Dr. Nandagauri, the principal of Dr. L.D. Balkhande College, Pauni, for all his help in putting this webinar together. Thanks are also due to the principal of CPN Berar College, Dr. Milind Barhate, for his guidance and support. Thank you, Dr. D.N. Jadhav, the head of my department, for helping me spread the word. I'd also like to thank Dr. Nishant Tipte and Dr. Prerna Ratnaparki for being my tech support for the entire duration of the webinar. Thank you one and all for making this webinar such a success. With this, we bring this event to a close. Thank you.
नंदा गवळी सर, नमस्कार.
नमस्कार.
नमस्कार. कसे आहात आपण?
बरं आहे.